Welcome to this cold opening of the Top Order podcast. The festive season is upon us. Gifts for one of us here on the pod today, but not for the other. You can guess who it is by the result of the Australia, India and New Zealand, England tests, which we'll cover in detail. A full pre-Christmas post-mortem here on the Top Order podcast after Stu manages to push the green button and make us wish. Beautiful.
I did it.
Beautiful. We'll make a producer out of you yet. Stuart, compliments of the season to you and your family and all of our listeners on the Top Order podcast as we move through the month of December.
You're a little bit early. I enjoy it. I was complimenting you before on the way you're organising the studio, and there's always something new when we turn up here. But yeah, I feel like we're only just at the start of December. You're like one of those people who starts playing Christmas carols in mid-November or something?
Oh, no, December 1 is the day. As soon as December 1 rolls around, it's Christmas season in our household. The tree goes up, all the decorations go out. I only have one box of decorations. My parents have 8, like big tea chests. Yeah, it takes my dad a week to get them out of the attic in his house.
Wow.
We digress, though, because there's cricket to talk about.
We could just keep talking about Christmas as far as I'm concerned.
Look, we're going to have to talk about at least one of these test matches, Stu, on this podcast. Otherwise, our listeners will forget that we're a cricket-based podcast, and we are. Why don't we talk about, when we do good news, bad news first. We'll do good news, at least for me, not great news if you're an Indian fan, and there are many on our podcast, and we thank you for tuning in and watching us, and please continue over the next half an hour, because there are some positives to come out of this test match so far. 1-1 now, having played in Perth and Adelaide. We head to Brisbane for the third test in only a couple of days' time. But a real bounce back from Australia in Adelaide, having been handed a pretty severe thrashing in Western Australia and Perth first up.
Yeah, I mean, why don't you talk to me about that? Because I would say when you and I just recorded that episode last week about, how that test went in Perth, you were pretty down, you were pretty upbeat to start the series. You predicted an Australian win, and that one result, it was, as a neutral now, I'm finding it, we'll get to this, but I'm finding it quite hard to kind of figure out what both of these results mean now, because we've sort of seen two quite definitive results for one side. But before we get to that, I mean, we did talk in Perth about how impressed you were with the bowling, and the bowling really set the tone again in this test.
Absolutely. We talk about Starc's barometer being either on or off and setting the tone for Australia. India won the toss in Adelaide and chose to bat first, which I still maintain is the right decision. Adelaide is by far the best batting track in Australia. It is by far the best surface in the country.
You want to bat during the light, during the light in Perth.
Absolutely. Rohit Sharma was back. They had Rohit back. They had Shubman back. They had all of the
Ashwin back as well.
Ashwin back. They had all of the pieces coming out of that victory in Perth to do really, really well in Adelaide. I thought that was a very vaunted batting lineup that we faced. But it just so happened that Starc got his barometer right first up. Jaswal, it came on too slow for him from Starc's bowling in Perth. I like that from the young guy. I really have to say, I really like the fact that he was able to take it to Mitchell Starc, both verbally and with the bat. But, Mitchell Starc got that first one to talk, trapped him in front, LBW. And I think that sets the tone for Australia. I think I saw a stat. He's the only guy in the history of world cricket that's got a wicket with the first ball of the test match three times in his career. And it just set the tone for Australia. I thought that Australia, as disciplined as they were in Perth, did a tremendous job against India's batters to not let them get away and build big partnerships. I think the difference between the two sides in Perth, other than the fact that Australia couldn't face Jasprit Bumrah at all in Perth. In fact, they couldn't face anyone in Perth, to be fair.
Yeah.
Particularly in that first innings. Australia did a great job of not letting anyone get away. And even though Nitish Kumar Reddy top scored, got 40s and so forth, they didn't let anyone build into a big score, build big partnerships in that top six. They got to Kohli early. They got him out early in both innings. So I thought that despite the fact that we were missing Josh Hazlewood, who was our best bowler in Perth, Australia's bowlers, Pat Cummins in particular, stood up tremendously well in this test match. I want to talk about his short pitch bowling at some point, but everyone in that bowling unit stood up and was counted. And because we didn't let India get away, we weren't reliant on overs from Mitchell Marsh or overs from Marnus or overs from Nathan Lyon. I think I only bowled one over in this whole test match. Probably needs to put in a part-time invoice. But didn't allow India to get on and get big partnerships, and that kept them in check in that first innings for sure.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to elaborate on Starc? Because, there are a few... aside from how well Starc did, you said you just want to talk about Cummins. I feel jealous that you have Scott Boland just sitting there. The fact that he can kind of come in and then just, be a metronome and hit that perfect spot outside off stump and, take the edge. It sort of feels unfair one for him that has to sit on the sidelines when he's clearly up to test standard. But also, I suppose, for the other sides around the world, you look at that bowling lineup and you go, gee, that's, the ultimate bowling attack. And then someone gets injured and Scott Boland comes in and can just almost do the same job, even though, Josh Hazlewood is such a tremendous bowler.
Look, Josh Hazlewood and Scott Boland are tremendous bowlers because they put the ball in the shoebox and they are good enough to make the ball do a little bit. I think we've seen this Kookaburra ball so far this series talk a little bit more than we've seen it do in previous years. Scott Boland comes in and he's always at you. He makes you play in the first over that he bowls. There are no looseners from Boland, just as there aren't with Hazlewood. And in this test match in particular, he struck with his first ball in the match. No ball, unlucky. Well, actually, don't overstep, Scott. So if you want to take wickets with the first ball, you can't overstep, okay? But he did it in the first over of his spell in the second innings as well. He makes things happen whenever he comes on to bowl because he's making you play all the time. And, the Indian batters found that out. He nicked guys off in this test match. So he is fantastic, Scott Boland, and he is, as you say, a ready-made replacement for the likes of Hazlewood, Starc or Cummins, and he's keeping guys like Richardson, like Lance Morris, like Michael Neser. He's keeping those guys well out of this test side at the moment because he's world-class.
Well, I sort of asked you this before just off air. It feels to me at the moment that batting, again, maybe some of this is coming from me watching this New Zealand-England test and kind of looking at New Zealand's performance, but even looking back to the Perth test and I guess this test here in Adelaide, it feels to me that batters are really struggling at the moment if the ball is moving at all. And I just don't, I don't know, I don't feel like they should be struggling as much as they are, as good as the bowlers are. I want to have this conversation without putting down the bowlers, because that was tremendous bowling by Australia. And it was tremendous bowling by India in the first test. But it seems like as soon as the ball is moving around, players just kind of can't handle it anymore.
I think there are a number of reasons for that. I think if you want to put it in a microcosm, right? And we'll talk about the New Zealand-England test, maybe in this podcast, maybe in the next one. But for the first time in his career, Ben Duckett left consecutive balls in this test match.
Yeah.
Consecutive balls. Like, batters want to feel bat on ball more now than they ever have before. They're playing more shots than they ever have before. They want to be bat on ball all the time. There are other players who aren't quite built like that. Marnus left a lot of balls go in this test match. There are a lot of players who are capable of leaving the ball, on or outside off stump or even over the top of the stumps. But I think there's less and less of that going on nowadays. There's more and more, I want to dominate the first half an hour rather than give the first half an hour to the bowlers, as Binksy pointed out last week on This Week in Cricket. So there is this mentality that the bat has to dominate the ball from ball one. We're not prepared to give the bowlers 6 or 12 overs while they're swinging the ball around, try and leave as many as possible, even wear a few on the body if you have to. So that mentality has changed. As fans, we're much, much more entertained by not only is the ball flying off the bat and runs are going for everywhere, and there's teams scoring at 4 and 5 and 6 and over, or even more in the New Zealand game, but there's also wickets flying when that's not happening. So I think it's not that batters can't bat; it's that they have a diet of white ball cricket, much more than they have in red ball cricket. They're used to seeing ball, hitting ball, and the bowlers are doing a tremendous job at wobbling the seam and producing just enough movement now to nick the edge, rather than beating the bat by 6 inches, 9 inches, whatever it happens to be. So yeah, I think it's a combination of two different skill sets coming together, because the bowlers have had to develop those skills because of T20 cricket and white ball cricket, right? If you bowl straight up and down now, you get murdered. You get absolutely murdered.
I know you wanted to talk a little bit more about the Australian bowling, but while we're on this, I thought, as much as Australia obviously rolled through India in that first innings, I almost thought the most pivotal session or period of this test match was Marnus and Nathan McSweeney's partnership on day one under the lights, because I feel like if if they were prime position. Obviously, Marnus was under a huge amount of pressure. Nathan McSweeney really struggled against Jasper in the first test. They were, Bumrah again was running in, bowling in that environment, and it was swinging miles. We'll touch in a second about whether they got that quite right. But I thought that what they did, the leaving, the being really patient, they were able to set the game up for Australia then by the way that they batted in that tea time session.
You're absolutely right. Australia, having lost the toss and been asked to field first, did a tremendous job bowling India out for 180. They did an even better job. In fact, they won this test match. And if we look back at the series and Australia go on to win this series, the turning point of this series so far has been Marnus and Nathan McSweeney, the second test player at home, under lights against Bumrah and co in that evening of the first day. That is the hardest time to bat traditionally in a pink ball test. We know that. You've got the premier fast bowler in the world, ably backed up by some pretty physical, some pretty emotionally charged bowling from this Indian side in this test match, as we'll talk to, I'm sure, and when we come to the second innings. But they were able to navigate that. And I think the most impressive thing to me was Sweeney's intent to get to 38 at the close of play. Marnus was patient. I think he was 23 off about 70 or 80 balls at the close of play on day one. But the fact that McSweeney was prepared to work the ball around, he was 38 at the end of play.
He grew in confidence, didn't
he? He started to settle into his work. I mean, he looked like a debutant in his first game, and it's amazing when you reflect on it. Some of these Indian players that have come into Test cricket over the last 12 months, Jacob Bethell likewise, come in with such confidence that they don't look like a debutant. And as good a form as McSweeney has been in his career to date, and particularly in the last 12 months, he has looked a little bit like a debutant, like a guy finding his way in Test cricket.
Yeah.
And it was like, I think it will do his confidence the world of good to have got that 38, 39 runs in the first innings, and then a nice little red anchor with a couple of nice shots through the offside in that second innings as well, which I'm sure we'll get to. So, look, Australia are a different batting unit once you get a decent platform. India had no platform in the first innings for their stroke makers, Kohli, Pant, etc., Rohit down the order, Nitish Kumar Reddy. They had no platform on which to build because they were under pressure all the time from the Australian bowlers. On the other side of the coin, McSweeney and Labuschagne got Australia off to a good start. Beginning of day two, India struck back and took 2 quick wickets, nicked McSweeney off with a good ball and then strangled Smith down the leg side. And then all of a sudden the test match was in the balance. But enter Travis Head on his home deck, and once again in Adelaide, Travis Head changes the complexion of a test match within a couple of hours.
Yeah, look, you can talk about Travis Head because I want to just kind of elaborate on what you said about McSweeney and Labuschagne, because I don't think it is an understatement or an overreaction, to say that was a turning point in potentially in this series, because I was watching that expecting them to crumble. Given the way that Perth test went, Marnus' struggles, McSweeney's struggles, I thought, in my
you can say it.
In my New Zealand way
you
of
could say it.
Enjoying Australian collapses, I was rubbing my hands together going, it's all about to happen here. We're going to get, 4 or 5 wickets tumble quickly, because it was moving. And as I said before, but I think it was, 1, they did a fantastic job. But 2, I think India will look back at that period and go, we really should have made them play more, because...
Too short.
Yeah, too short and just not quite getting the lines right. Bumrah was, he's, again, we've talked about him so much and he's such a fantastic bowler. He was setting McSweeney up, but then he'd go for the ball that was the wicket-taking ball, and it would be just offline and it would fly down the leg side for 4 byes, or it just didn't make them work as hard as I think they needed to get those wickets. And I think there was a period of about 5 overs and they'd been able to leave the ball about 18. They were leaving it well over 50% of the time. And it's those key moments that you have to take advantage of, and they just weren't able to do that. And like you said, it set the game up for Travis Head.
India's supporting cast in this test match were off. Not by a lot, but they were ever so slightly off compared to their performance in Perth.
Yeah.
India's supporting cast were outstanding in Perth. They were good, I thought, in Adelaide, but they weren't great. and it allowed Australia just enough release off the pressure valve that they could weather the storm from Jasprit Bumrah, even though Jasprit had 3 for 40, I think, at one stage, and the other guys had like none for 70.
Yeah.
In fact, I think at one point, the other Indian bowlers were 1 for 170 before Siraj came back and took 3 or 4 wickets at the back end of the innings to tidy up his figures a little bit. So Australia did a tremendous job targeting Harshit Rana in particular. He was a little bit loose, but Australia pounced on anything from him. And they made Nitish Kumar Reddy pay. He went over fours in that first innings. So Australia really did an excellent job identifying opportunities to score against the supporting cast and making sure they weren't tied down, they weren't dominated by Ashwin, even though Ashwin went for sort of threes. They weren't allowing Ashwin to bowl to them. They were prepared to take the attack to him a little bit. So there were no real opportunities for the Indian supporting cast to settle into a rhythm and restrict Australia for when Bumrah came back on. Because when he came back on, he was coming back on having to take a wicket, not looking to break the game open.
Yeah, they couldn't quite get it going from both ends, could they? And I mean, why don't you go on Travis Head? Because we've been sort of threatening for Australia to, that's the Australian game plan, is to be able to have Marsh and Head to let loose and turn a game or put the foot down and really help Australia get an advantage in the game. And that's what he did. As you said, they were in a position where the game started to come slightly back into the balance again, but Travis Head was able to take it away and make sure Australia had a big advantage in that first innings.
Let's have a look at the scorecard when Smith got out. So Smith got out in the 41st over. Australia were 3 for 100. So they're only going at 2.5 to that point. So they struggled through the night session. They struggled a little bit in the morning, lost 2 for when Smith went. And then you have a look at when Marsh gets out in the 63rd over, so 23 overs later, Australia are 5 for 208. So, they've put on 100 runs in 20 overs with Marsh, Head and Labuschagne, and then Head and Marsh together. So those two partnerships brought them 100 runs in 20 overs. All of a sudden, Australia are scoring at 5s. Heads at a run of ball. Alex Carey provided tremendous support, and then it kind of fell away towards the end there a little bit. But look, you cannot say enough great words about Travis Head's innings. He was brutal against that Indian attack. He decided that anything that was wide, he was going to go. We know how strong he is through the offside, and that suits him in Adelaide because the boundaries are smaller square of the wicket. They're not as small as they used to be, but they're still, not big.
Yeah.
But the addition to his game in the last 3 years has been his ability to see the ball on his body and work it through the leg side. So not only now is he trying to smash the ball through the offside, but if the bowlers then adjust their line and they're bowling straight, he can flick it off his legs. He can play the pull shot when the ball is short. So he provides the bowlers very, very few opportunities on a ground like Adelaide to bowl successfully to him, because it's not like they can make him play down the ground. So look, he has developed that area of his game really, really well. I don't think India went short enough to him. He has been found out in a couple of years against quality fast bowling when they go short, and I'm talking about kind of at the badge kind of height.
Yeah.
He didn't really get enough of those early on. He started pretty scratchily. Like, he wasn't great for his first 10 runs.
Yeah.
But then he starts getting his hands going, and, once he gets going, he is very, very difficult to stop. And the only reason he was able to get going is because he had enough of a platform through those first 40 overs that by the time that he comes in, those Indian bowlers are starting to flag, and we saw their paces drop, and we saw some of the venom fall out of that attack.
Ball's not moving as much.
And by the time you get to the second new ball around that sort of 81st over, when Head finally got out, he was already 140 at that point, and Australia were well in front of the game.
Where do you want to go next? Because, I suppose the next chronologically is India sort of falling apart again. And you talked about some of those other Australian bowlers that you were impressed with. Pat Cummins?
I think Pat Cummins has been really good in this series. I know people were sort of criticising him for being flat in Perth, but he had a job to do, which was to come in first change after Hazlewood had bowled a great spell, Starc had bowled a great spell, and just make sure that he maintained his line and length. Wasn't as successful in the second innings, I grant you, but he managed to bowl the short ball really well in this test match. And I've been super critical of test teams in the recent past not using the short ball effectively, either going to it for too long a period or telegraphing it too much.
Telegraphing it to tail enders particularly.
Yeah, indeed. But in this case, you have a look at the wickets that he got. So he gloved Rahul down the leg side in the second innings to get Australia underway.
Yep.
Brilliant ball to get Rohit out. We'll come back to Rohit's batting in a little bit.
Yeah.
He gloved Ashwin.
Can't blame him too much for that one, I hope.
He gloved Ashwin off. He gloved Harshit Rana off to gully. And, he got that short ball to get Nitish Kumar Reddy out when he was kind of held out the third man. But he played good. We want to talk about Nitish Kumar Reddy. Yeah. He looks ready-made for Test cricket. No pun intended. Sorry, team. But, Cummins got the short ball right. And, he's the kind of bowler who's always awkward. He's always hitting the shoulder of the bat or the gloves. But he got his lengths right in that session, in that he was full, and then he bowled the short ball well, I thought.
Again, you kind of mentioned some positives for India, apart from Kumar Reddy. I don't know that there's that many. Is there? I mean, let's talk about him briefly, because he's quite an interesting person to discuss, I think, because, he's an interesting person because, yes, he looks incredibly comfortable with the bat. With the ball, he's good, but I don't know what he's providing your attack necessarily in terms of what are you getting from him? I suppose it doesn't matter so much when you've got Ashwin or Sundar or Jadeja, pick any of those spinners, because they can all bat as well, and you can mix and match that lineup so that you end up with 4 bowlers from 8 to 11, and you can still have Kumar Reddy in at 7 or Kumar Reddy in at 8, and you can still have a really good batting lineup and have a couple of options. But I don't. It's sort of almost the Hardik Pandya discussion to some level, in that I'm not sure that he's he's still very young, but I'm not sure that he's necessarily the fourth seamer you want maybe in these conditions.
Possibly not on evidence in the first 2 test matches, but I think there's lots of potential there for that young guy. In the same way that I think there's lots of potential in Nathan Smith for New Zealand. Very similar kind of player. Very, very good batter, runs and bangs the ball into the wicket. If he develops...
They're almost, I would say, very similar. They're almost kind of the reverse though, aren't they? Like, I would say Smith is a bowling all-rounder. Kumar Reddy, I would class him as a batting all-rounder.
And I would tend to agree. But I think that both of them have some work to do in terms of variations with their bowling.
Yep.
If Nitish Kumar Reddy can develop a bit of variation, if he can... Look, the other thing that we've got to say is he's also bowling with an old ball a lot of the time, right? So it's very, very difficult for guys like this to come in and be a point of difference if they're bowling with the old ball. We saw Harshit Rana bowl well in Perth when he got a reasonably new ball that was doing a bit, and he can go in and bang the ball into the top of the off stump and have it nibble about a bit.
Yep.
Like, what's Nitish Kumar Reddy supposed to do when he's bowling overs 45 through to 80?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's a very, very tough thing for him to be able to come in and do when we know the ball doesn't move for anyone during that period, let alone a guy who's only 21 years old. So I think there's lots of potential in that guy. And if you talk about test coaches, test captains, test squads being built on potential of young players these days, he's a guy that looks, again, no pun intended, ready-made for that all-rounder spot. Not that India are short of all-rounders at the moment, but he looks like a really, really test standard cricketer. And Australia really struggled to get him out so far in this series.
Oh, yeah, he's looked good.
They've really struggled to get him out. You go through the top order, and Australia have figured most of those guys out, second innings in Perth notwithstanding. But it doesn't look like they've got great plans to Nitish Kumar Reddy, other than to bowl the ball short and hope he hits it to a fielder, which has happened a couple of times.
Yeah. What do you make of that Indian batting lineup then? Because, again, we talked before about batters in general being a bit fragile. I think the hope was, after that first test and the big score that they put on with Jaiswal and Rahul looked really solid, and Kohli obviously scored 100, you sort of thought, okay, this batting lineup that looked really fragile against New Zealand, maybe they're not so fragile. Maybe they'll come back into form. Maybe going to play on better pitches has really helped. Now we've just seen a test that's over in 2 days and one session, and this Indian batting lineup maybe didn't look as solid as certainly it did in the second innings of that test.
I don't know. I think we probably shouldn't overreact to the fact that Australia just bowled really well in Adelaide and had some good conditions, some reasonable conditions to bowl in. I think there was still some very, very good batting conditions in this test match that both sides probably didn't take advantage of as much as they could have.
Given pink ball tests, we do see wickets fall, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And pink ball tests typically don't go 5 days. In fact, most test matches these days don't go 5 days. But if you have a look at the disappointing thing for India, okay, Jaswal got a ball in the first ball of the game. He missed it. That can happen to an opening batter, right? There's nothing fragile about that dismissal. The positive for India is that Gill came in and got a start.
Yeah,
Rahul got a start. Pant got a start. Kumar Reddy got a start. Ashwin got past 20 in the first innings. Then you have a look at the second innings for India. Gill got another 20. Jaswal got 24. Pant got another 28. Nitish Kumar Reddy got another number 42. So there are lots of guys getting starts in that Indian side. The only problem is that they didn't go on. And Australia were either very, very lucky that they picked up wickets at the right times, or Australia bowled well enough, let's give them credit, that just as India was starting to put partnerships together, Australia managed to finagle a wicket, and it was either Boland or Cummins or, Starc that were able to come on and change the course of that game through breaking partnerships. So when I say there are positives for India, guys are getting starts, and you see when one of them goes on and converts, Perth happens, and India score 400 for 6 and make Australia look really, really silly.
Yeah, and I do think your point about not overreacting, I think, is key here, because I know it sounds really silly to say, because we were criticising New Zealand, I think, in that first test that New Zealand played. Here, look at all these starts. Like, isn't that so disappointing that all these starts and nobody went on? But it is as simple as that, actually. When guys, all you need is one of them to then go on and score 100, and suddenly your 280 or 250 or 200 or whatever it is turns into 400. And you just need one or two partnerships. And I suppose if you are going to look at that way for India, you're going, none of these. I think you're really happy that Gill came back and actually looked in good touch. Like, it's not like he didn't look out of sorts. Rohit's probably the one that I think because I was surprised actually after the first test how much sort of Rohit negativity there was on our chat. People can again chime in if they have any thoughts there. A lot of people were saying, don't bring him back. Like, don't bring Rohit Sharma back. KL Rahul looked so good at the top. We love Bumrah, a much better captain than Rohit Sharma. I don't think anything Rohit did in this game necessarily is like the reason for. It would have been nice for him to score more runs, obviously. But he got, as you said, very good ball from Cummins in that second test or second innings. I don't know that there's much you can do. But I suppose on that point, I'm again like that first test. I still feel like I'm trying to work out, are these teams good? Are they evenly matched? Are they not good? Can they? I don't really know.
Let me give you the Charles Barkley version of events. Both sides are good cricket sides. Neither Australia after Perth, nor India after Adelaide, nor India after the New Zealand series fundamentally have changed anything about themselves. What we are discovering is that the margin, the slippery slope between the top of the slide and the bottom of the slide is very, very steep. It doesn't take much. You don't have to be off by much when these two sides are going up against each other for one to get the upper hand and for it to look like a very one-sided affair. Australia got on a roll in this game. India got on a roll twice in Perth and made Australia look a little bit like feather dusters. Australia got on a roll. In fact, it was really one guy who got on a big roll in Adelaide, and it was Travis Head, and he made Australia look like roosters in this particular game.
Yeah.
And so he was the one difference. And again, one guy goes big from Australia. We had our top 6, only 2 guys got past 40 in this test match. McSweeney got 39, and then the rest of the returns for Smith, for Khawaja, for Mitchell Marsh were pretty average returns. None of them got past 20. Alex Carey didn't get past 20. Cummins and Starc pitched in, but none of those guys got past 20. So, from that perspective, Australia made the most of their opportunities in this test match. India made the most of their opportunities in Perth. And the difference between those two sides at the moment is who was taking those opportunities and who is standing up mentally to what is actually two very evenly matched teams going after each other at this point. you might say that Marnus is flattered to deceive by getting 60 in this test match, but he's gone back to what works for him, which is let a lot of balls go, but also showing a bit more positive intent. So I really like the positive intent that Marnus showed, at least to get off strike and rotate things around. He was hitting the ball down the ground, particularly through the leg side, much better than he has previously. So that was all to the good for Australia. As far as Rohit is concerned, the fact that he's batting at number 6 is a reaction to how well KL Rahul played in the first test match as a foil for Yashavi Jaiswal. And I think after Perth, we all agreed that KL Rahul looks a better opening partner, and they look a more settled opening combination when those two bat together.
Like you said, they look like they complement each other maybe better than Rohit and Yashavi Jaiswal do.
Look, the reality is that, if those two players, if Rohit and Jaiswal batted together 10 times, they might put on the same number of 100-run partnerships as Rahul and Jaiswal do. But I think the floor for the KL Rahul Jaiswal partnership is higher than the Rohit Jaiswal partnership. I think if both guys try to tee off, and look, Rohit has shown us that that's the game that he wants to play, I think it's much more likely that one of them comes unstuck rather than that other partnership. The other reason I don't mind Rohit at 6 is I'd love to see Rohit come out when the ball is not doing a lot. He got in both of these innings, he was coming in with the ball still moving around a bit and his team in trouble. He's not an MS Dhoni kind of rescuer, but he is a guy who could come in and go, you know what? I'm playing that Mitchell Marsh role. If I come in at 4 for 150 or 4 for 200, he could go and get 145 balls in that situation and really take the game away from Australia quite quickly. He wasn't able to do that on this occasion. I think a lot of Indian fans would like to see him at the top of the order, but I just think he could be devastating to any international side in any conditions if he's coming in and the ball is flat and the team's a bit tired. Again, he hasn't got the platform on which he can build an innings.
Well, and the reality is he's not in the form he was, a few years ago. Like I don't think there's any going past it, and I don't think anyone's trying to suggest that he is. And I think that's why we do see him down here. I think that's why he is under pressure. He's got to score runs in this series. Otherwise, it's the same conversation we had when we looked at the preview for this series. Some of these guys, Kohli and Sharma, in a way they are fighting for their position. There's so many players in India pushing for spots. And if he goes through this series now and plays these next 3 tests and doesn't really perform, there's going to be big calls for, can he actually hold his spot once the Champions Trophy's over and Test cricket sort of starts again. I think they go to England, don't they, at some point next English summer. So I think there's questions. Do you think that there are changes on the horizon for either of these two teams? That the turnaround's much quicker this time, isn't it?
Yeah, we go straight to Brisbane, and there's not a lot of turnaround. Look, it sells copy to talk about there needing to be change. It sold a lot of copy talking about Australia needing to change their team between Adelaide or between Perth and Adelaide. It will sell a lot of copy talking about India needing to change their side between Adelaide and Brisbane. Look, the reality is we're six test matches removed from a Rohit Sharma 100 against, I think it was against England in Dharamshala, right? And then you have to go back another 2 test matches and he got on 131 against England at Rajkot. So, he's got 200s in the last
smashed it against Bangladesh as well, I think.
Exactly. You go back and have a look
to turn that game.
You go have a look at Mitchell Marsh's record. He's got 106 years batting at number 6.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. You have to go back to January 2018 to go past. He's got some 90s and stuff. So let's not mix about. He's got scores. I'm not saying that he hasn't got scores, but he's got 100, I think, a year ago. And then you have to go back to 2018, the last time he got 100 in the test match for Australia.
Wow, that's
surprising. I'm pretty sure that's right. I looked at that earlier today. I'll go and have a look at it again just to make sure that I'm not making that up for attention, and we'll edit it out if I'm wrong. But
no, we won't.
So it's not like he's thoroughly out of form, but I think it's like what works best for this Indian side. And I think at the moment, if you have a look at the way that those two are bat together, Rahul and Jaiswal, I think they work better as an opening combo. Vamp while I go and find this other Mitchell Marsh stat.
I think while it's so hard, the selection question. I always find it tough. I mean, look, we're going to get into some selection stuff when we talk about New Zealand and England, particularly on the New Zealand side of things. But your point before about the gap, I guess, between the top sides and, sides 5, 6, 7 in the rankings even at the moment, I think that what we are seeing in Test cricket is exactly that. And I can't quite put my finger on why that's happening. Again, we asked the question before. We touched on a bit of, maybe white ball cricket is sort of changing how Test cricket is being played. It's making it's meaning that batters aren't necessarily as patient before. It means that batting lineups are devised differently in terms of what the roles are for some of those players. But it means, I think, that if you're not quite on your game, there are plenty of other bowling attacks around the world that are able to capitalize on that. And suddenly we're seeing this all around the world, right? We've just seen, New Zealand got smashed by Sri Lanka, went to India, smashed India. Back home, they're getting smashed by England, who were, in Pakistan and got thumped by Pakistan. And Pakistan doesn't seem like they're a great side at the moment. We're seeing, Sri Lanka getting absolutely demolished by South Africa. We're seeing India bounce back and beat Australia. It seems the most open that it's been for a long time. And whether that's down to the fact that maybe batting has kind of changed and it's meaning that there are enough bowling sides that are good enough around the world. Because, I don't know, 12 months ago, as we said, I think we've touched on this before, 12 months ago, I absolutely just thought Australia and India, the best two teams in the world, they are going to be, contesting the World Test Championship final. They're clearly the two best sides. But then, it just seems to change very, very quickly. And I think that's what makes the selection question hard, because you think someone is out of form or you think something needs to change. But then, I don't know, they stuck with Marnus, and we just talked about how pivotal that was. Whether Marnus is the answer forever, who knows? But what he did was a really valuable contribution. And it makes all of those questions really, really tricky to navigate.
It does. And for India going from Adelaide to Brisbane, I think it's a case of same team, better performances are required.
Yeah.
Now,
what are we going to see differently about Brisbane? I mean, it obviously is not going to be a pink ball.
No pink ball. Difficult to say, really, because there's not a lot of international data about test matches being played in Brisbane at this time of year.
Yeah, because it's normally early.
Traditionally, it's been that sort of November test match early on in the season, little bit of humidity in the overheads. Ball nips around a bit off the surface because it's a little bit green early in the summer. Now that the Brisbane wicket will have another 3 or 4 weeks to just get a little bit browner, there'll be a little bit more like heat on it. We're getting into the really, really hot part of the year in that part of the world. So I'm not actually sure, if I'm honest, what we're going to get from the surface. But what India need to bring to the table is that their supporting cast, from a bowling perspective, need to be better. And they need to be able to build partnerships against this Australian bowling attack, because whoever Australia put forward in that test match, you just know that they're going to go into that test match with discipline, with good plans against those Indian batters. And Australia have shown under Pat Cummins that they're prepared to be a little bit patient. They're not the side that's going to panic if they don't take a wicket, or they don't have the side 30 for 4. Because Australia have done a really good job in this test series in Adelaide, making sure that India didn't get away from them. India looked threatened, like on a number of occasions. I thought India are just going to get away here if they can bat for another 5 overs. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, Boland comes in and next one off, or Cummins bowls a good ball to Rahul, gloves him down the leg side. Australia have just got that knack at the moment of picking up Indian wickets in 3 out of the 4 innings that we've seen.
And I think to elaborate on that, I think the first 30 overs with the way that this bowling attack is structured are so crucial for Australia as well, because of the way that they bowl with that new ball, the way that they are channeled around those 3 seamers. I do think Nathan Lyon will play a part in the series. He hasn't played a huge part as yet, but Mitchell Marsh is under a bit of a question mark around his bowling. What can he offer in terms of how many overs he can give but also how's his body at the moment. So if you can see off those guys and build a partnership, which again, the one innings that it has come off for India, that's what they did. They built that early partnership, set that platform, and suddenly it looked very, very easy to bat.
Made Australia look really flat. Yeah. And look, they're going to get some good batting conditions in Brisbane. There will be times in that test match when it's going to be really good for batting. And that venue, if there's not a breeze blowing, it gets really hot because it's just a concrete bowl. It's like a mini MCG, if you like. And there is very little in the way of breeze getting into the ground. So if it's kind of still in a Brisbane day, it can get very, very hot in that venue. So India, if they can get away, I think they can really, really make Australia pay in Brisbane, but they're going to have to bring slightly better approach to batting, and I think their supporting bowling cast is going to have to stand up as well. That's 40 minutes on Australia v India.
I've been trying to talk about this game as long as I can, so I don't have to face the facts. But you can start asking the hard questions if you want to. You
made me face the music last week. I'm going to make you face the music this week. Let's turn our attention to New Zealand versus England. Second test. We must at the Basin Reserve in Wellington. 3-day test match, all over inside 3 days. Not a great test match for New Zealand fans. Great test match for England fans, and it's a shame that we don't have Jamie and Adam here on the pod to give their version of an early crow.
Well, it's not an early crow. They've won the series now. They've won the series 2-0. It's apparently the first time they've won in New Zealand since 2007-8, so which seems surprising, but I guess we've had a decent, we've been able to kind of feel like England's always kind of good for a test, maybe like Binksy said, but we've been able to sort of, they've been quite even series. And I think last week maybe I was kidding myself, but last week I was able to look at that test and go, we dropped so many catches that we just didn't give ourselves an opportunity, and it felt like last week could have been quite an even test. If New Zealand take those opportunities, this week they've just been absolutely thumped, and it's really deflating. I'm getting a dry throat, so you can kind of elaborate from a neutral point of view, but I feel really flat after this game.
I think New Zealand should be a little flat, in that they did take their opportunities early doors, right?
The dry throat.
The catches went down in Christchurch.
Yeah.
Didn't take their opportunities. New Zealand did take their opportunities early on.
Great.
They caught tremendously well in this test match. Had England 40 for 4 on day one, 12 and a half overs into the game. And that was New Zealand's huge opportunity to blow this game wide open. Unfortunately, they ran into Harry Brook and Ollie Pope. Harry Brook played what he described as his best 100, and he's made some hundreds so far in his young career.
I thought it was, so far so much better than the 100 that he scored in Christchurch. I know he ended up getting 170. Obviously, that had some chances in that game, but this one, I didn't hear him say that it was his best 100.
Favourite.
I would agree that it's the best 100 that I've seen him score because, Binksy and Jamie would be able to elaborate on it better than me. But I think that what he did in that, one, they got in that position and then they counterattacked. New Zealand was right on top, and as soon as Pope and Brook came in, they said, "Okay, well, you guys are going all right, but we're going to put you back under pressure." And that's what they've done this whole series, the whole with bat and ball. Whenever New Zealand's looked like, okay, we might be getting a foothold in this game, England's put them under pressure and New Zealand's crumbled. But what Brook did is you'd bowl him a good ball and then he'd go, "Oh, all right, okay, well, that was a good ball." And then they bowl him another one and he'd take 2 steps down the wicket and smash it over cover for 6. And you're kind of like, well, what do I do now? What do I do now? And he in that way, he doesn't look like he doesn't look like he has a weakness, I suppose. He's, if you look around some of his dismissals in Pakistan and things, maybe spin is a slight weakness. I don't think spin's going to be a weakness in New Zealand because of, those pitches are just completely different. But yeah, he looks like a player. I mean, those guys were talking about Kevin Peterson. I do feel it's a bit early for those kind of comparisons, but he does almost average 100 overseas. He's averaging 60 in international cricket, in Test cricket overall.
He's averaging 100 in New Zealand.
Yeah,
he's absolutely
I am
phenomenal.
sick of the sight of him smashing boundaries, but
I'm sure you are. He is prodigious when we talked about the ball moving around. He is absolutely prodigious when the ball is straight up and down. If you bowl straight up and down to any of these England top 6, right? I'm going to include Ollie Pope in that, because this was a return for Ollie Pope, I think, in this Test match. Again, batting at number 6, 66 in the first innings. I think that's his home. I really think that's his home.
He looks super comfortable with the gloves as well, to be honest.
Well, he looks terrific. Well, we'll talk about the gloves when Binksy's on the pod, because I think we need an expert opinion on the gloves.
Yeah, that's fair.
But he's been tidy with the gloves, and I think he just looks absolutely at home in number 6. And, you know, if you have a think about it, like, how are they going to fit he and Jamie Smith into this side? Because Jamie Smith put no foot wrong and has missed out on the start of this tour. But yeah, between
Bethell's, you know, as much as, you know, I wasn't having a dig at Bethell last week. I just did say that I thought those second innings runs were, you know, not, there was no pressure on him. And in a way, there was no pressure on him in this, when he scored the 90 as well. But he looks, you know, the way he hits the ball, he puts pressure on the bowlers in the same way. And, you know, we've been talking about this for a while. England batters don't seem to feel pressure because of the way that they play with freedom, and they've been encouraged to play with freedom. And it means that when the ball is up and down, they can just play with freedom, see ball, hit ball, and it's very, very hard to bowl to when they're doing that.
Here's the dirty little secret about Bazball. The success of Bazball, the actual game changing part of Bazball or cricket under McCullum and Stokes, call it what you want, is not how fast they score or how attacking their fields are. It's that they can create an environment where, one, their players can have such a goldfish memory of forgetting the ball before and getting back to their processes and getting back to like focusing on the next thing that's coming, and having that absolute freedom of mind and of body to be able to go, if the ball is in my zone, it's going to go. And it doesn't matter if I'm Zach Crawley and I'm on a run of low scores. If I get the first ball of the innings and it's a juicy wide ball outside off stump, even if it's not a half volley, even if it's halfway up my pads, I'm going to thrash it through the offside for 4. And if I get another one, I'm going to thrash it through the offside for 4. And if I get one on leg stump, I'm going to smash it through mid-wicket. And even if I get caught, it doesn't matter. And all of those England players talk about having that consistency of selection and consistency of mindset, that they can actually just forget about the ball that just beat them, you know, and they can go, right, if the ball's in my zone, I'm just going to smash it. And if it beats me again, well, so be it. And if I nick off, well, so be it. And, you know, Adam talked about riding the roller coaster last week, and that's what all of these players do. But they just have this brilliant way of just running a ruler through the thing that just happened and focusing on the thing that's coming up next. And, you know, Harry Brook does that as well as anybody. You know, you can beat Harry Brook 5 times in an over, but the next over, he's going to come back and he's going to put you for 20 runs because he's just forgotten all about that. And he's got a ball in his own. He goes bang. So you just can't say enough good things about Harry Brook. And, you know, even when he gets out, he still gets 55 in the second innings, just an unbelievable player.
I think what I can't put my finger on is the tactical side of things for New Zealand in terms of how they've faced this McCullum-Stokes era of English cricket. Every single time they've played them, really, it really does seem to rattle them in a way that other sides are starting to get a handle on it, or starting to figure out how they can maybe go at some of the weaknesses of some of these England players. I mean, I think New Zealand have done that well in this series so far with Zach Crawley. I think they've really identified that ball, you know, tracking back in to Zach Crawley's off stump, pitching outside off, back into the stumps, has dismissed him. You know, Henry and
Henry's got him 4 out of 4.
Yeah, Henry's got him 4 out of 4. But I remember watching that first test, and I messaged Raj at the time, Southee's going to get him here. And I think after the first over, I said Southee's going to get him next over, coming back in, trapped in front, because of just that, with that 3/4 ball. It seems like that's a weakness, and it seems like New Zealand are bowling to it. They've done it. They've executed that plan. For the other batters, it seems like as soon as they kind of get away, I don't know, it seems like New Zealand takes a while to react. Sometimes we've been able to get on top and have the wickets, and then they'll get going. Like Pope and Brook counterattacked, and New Zealand was a little bit reluctant to shut off the zones, I think, for those players. You fall in, it is hard. They put the pressure on you, but it means that you fall into the trap of we're going well here, it feels like if we put a boundary rider back or if we change the field to, short catches or whatever, if we mix it up and get creative, then we're letting them dictate the game.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's the approach. I think you see the way that Stokes captains the side. And that's, again, and it has been talked about a bit, but another sort of key to how when England is going really well, Stokes is one step ahead, or if he's not one step ahead, he's got 15 plans in his head, and he knows, okay, well, this might work to this batter. And so this batter's been going for a little while, and now I'm going to try this plan, and then I'm going to try this plan. And it feels like New Zealand are reluctant to necessarily try certain plans until it's, Harry Brook and Ollie Pope are flying along, and then suddenly they take out slips, and then the ball goes through slips, or they push slips wider, and then they all go, oh, man, really unlucky because the ball's flown past our heads and things. But England's going, well, that's 4 more runs to the 4 more runs to the total, and suddenly it just gets away so quickly on this New Zealand side. And I don't think we've ever been able to really kind of get a handle on how to approach that in this era.
You're running up against it, I think. And I don't want to be unkind here, but you have a look at Southee's contribution in this Test match. He went at 5. Like, traditionally, when opposition have been getting on top of your bowling attack, you've had different bowlers being able to bowl to different plans and be effective in executing those plans.
Yes.
Bolt goes full and straight. Wagner goes into the body, bowls a little bit of short stuff, or can swing the ball if he really needs to. Southee traditionally was able to move the ball away from the batter early at the top of the innings, and then was able to bowl dry through those middle overs when the ball was old. He was able to be economical and bowl in a good area.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, those plans don't work to these batters. And
O'Rourke's the only bowler with any real point of difference because of his height.
Exactly.
And I'm not sure we're using him quite in the optimal ways either.
Exactly. And Nathan Smith has looked promising early on in his Test career, but as you say, he didn't make the ball talk. Again, very difficult when you're coming on second or third change to be able to make the ball talk. But those bowlers that you've been asking to do the job for you for such a long time, they got on top of Henry a little bit in this Test match. He went at 5.5 in the second innings, and I think he went at 4s in the first. No, he went 2.8 in the first innings.
Yeah, I thought he was really good
in the first innings. Yeah. But Nathan Smith went at 7s, even though he got 4 for. So it's one of those things where you've got guys that just aren't able to put the ball in the right areas or do just enough with the ball to make England check their shot.
The Southee conversation, I mean, I actually thought that he bowled really, really well in the after lunch in that Brook Pope partnership. They were going along really well, and then it got to drinks, and I thought from then on, Southee came on, and he actually did dry up the runs, and through that period, New Zealand kind of wrestled back control of that game, and they got them all out for 280, and you thought, actually, we've done a pretty good job here.
Mm-hmm.
280. There's nothing wrong with this pitch. We're going along fine here, and people are going to look at this game like they looked at the last game and go, we got to drop some Southee. I can tell you right now, I feel like that's not going to happen.
It's a moot point. He's got one more test.
He's got one more test.
They're not going to drop him for Hamilton.
I don't think so. Maybe they would. It feels like it almost. I know this is, again, sounds defeatist, but it feels pointless.
It's counterproductive now, having lost the series.
If they wanted to
sack Tim Southee before
and
his last
he's
test
not
match.
to blame for this test. I don't think he's the reason that New Zealand have lost this test. The reason that New Zealand have lost this test is because they've collapsed twice. Southee hasn't been the best bowler, and I think what's tricky about Southee is, one, the England batters don't respect him anymore. And I think that's having a real impact, that they can just say, you're bowling 130 Ks at your best. We can just walk down and hit you wherever we want to. As soon as it stops swinging after the first few overs, we can do whatever we want to you. And I think that's making it really difficult. And that's not ideal when you've got, an important bowler in your side. And what it's also doing is the tactical part of things. It means that Will O'Rourke's not bowling until, I think Henry's been great. Will O'Rourke, I think, has been much better than his stats show in this game, these two tests so far. and he's not often bowling until an hour into the test, 20 overs into the test, sometimes 16 overs into the test. And he's looked the most threatening, if you ask me, when particularly once the ball, Henry's looked really good early on, but once the ball's a bit older, Will O'Rourke's been the one that you look at the way that the batters play him, and it looks like they don't want to face him in the way that they'd rather face all the other guys than face Will O'Rourke, and when he's really got a new hard rock in his hands. So I think that's the challenging part. Yeah, we've said it many times. I don't think Southee's performances haven't warranted a spot. I don't think there's any doubt of that. But it's sort of a pointless conversation because he's got one more test and he's going to play it.
Yeah, I don't think it's any point throwing the Southee out with the bathwater at the moment.
No.
I would say that is he the reason New Zealand lost the test match? Not by himself, but as you say, his bowling to those England batters, they don't fear Tim Southee. And in fact, they don't fear anyone. So it's pointless putting the blame on Tim Southee for the fact that England don't fear him, because they don't fear anyone. So that's not a slight on Tim Southee. But what I would say is that collectively, New Zealand haven't given as good an account of themselves man for man as I think they would have expected themselves to. And a lot of that goes into the batting department. And we have a look at that first innings score, and it reads almost like a telephone directory, or a set a lot of numbers. There's a lot of numbers in the team.
This wasn't a 3-day test wicket, was it? I mean, I'm not dreaming.
No. This was not a bad test wicket. No. Well, have a look at how many England scored in the second innings. 83 overs, 5.1 runs and over, 427 for 6 declared. And quite frankly, they were having a centre wicket session for at least half of that time.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, Duckett and Bethell and Root in particular, and Stokes, they could still be batting this time they could still be batting this time on day 5. If they had really,
well, it's only day 3.
Really,
they could actually have.
Yeah, they could actually have still been batting if they had really decided they wanted to put their foot down and grind New Zealand into the dirt. But they decided that once Joe Root had got 100, that was kind of enough for them, and they were, in fairness, 580 ahead at that point.
Yeah, they had enough.
We have to talk about this New Zealand batting, because This is the same conversation that you and I had sitting in front of this bar a week ago when we were talking about the aftermath of the Perth test, because it seemed that whatever Wokes and Atkinson and Bryden Cass were able to dish up, it was finding the edge or beating the bat of those New Zealand top order.
Yeah, and this is also going to sound a bit ridiculous, but I'm not sure this England bowling attack's that good. Like they've done a good job, but I don't think it's like. I don't think that you shouldn't be getting bowled out for the scores that you're getting bowled out to against this England attack. It's not like they're ripping through us because they're moving it all over the place, or they're jagging it miles off the seam. They're not doing anything out of the ordinary. They're bowling to good plans. I think Bryden Cass has been absolutely fantastic in this series. I think Wokes has really found his. When he's been on, he's been really, really good. He's bowled in, he's been the couple of dismissals he's got of Kane Williamson have been really, really crucial in the times that he's got them. Like I said, I'm not trying to diminish what they've done. They've done a good job, but they shouldn't be ripping through New Zealand in the way that they have. It's not like they're not to the level of Bumrah. They're not to the level of this Australian bowling attack in the way that they go about things. And these pitches are not they're not situations where New Zealand should be getting carved up. I think the problem falls more on the New Zealand batting, and as you've highlighted, how they're playing, and we highlighted it in the preview. This opening partnership is going to be crucial for New Zealand. That both of those two players, they found patches of form in the India series. There were question marks about both of them in that series, leading into that series. I think for both of them, it's been a long time since they've scored Test hundreds. You mentioned Mitchell Marsh before. It's been 18 months for, I think, more, possibly over 18 months for both of Blundell, not Blundell, who scored 100 today, who we might talk about in a minute, but Latham and Conway. It's been a while since they scored Test hundreds, and I don't think you can have a solid opening partnership if you haven't got openers who are going to score hundreds for you. in semi-regular patterns. That's how you build a side. You build a side where you've got your top 3 or 4 are actually performing strongly, and they're just not doing it. And I think for Conway in particular, it's getting to the point where it's actually painful to watch. I am physically upset
as a fan,
watching him as a fan. I mean, particularly because I remember maybe it was in this room, maybe it was at Binksy's place when we were recording there. The conversations that me and Raj were having about him was, he could be a New Zealand great, and he started his career so well. We thought, he's a rock for our side for the next 4 or 5 years because of the way he looks. He looked like he had the mentality for international cricket. He just looks lost at the moment, and he's all of the technical things that they've always been question marks for him. He doesn't move his feet that well early. The ball coming, teams have figured him out, pretty early on, teams figured him out. You try and bowl the ball through the gate, really. You try and come back at his, between bat and pad. He often would nick the ball inside edge. He would inside edge it a lot. Now he's not inside edging it. Now he's missing it and it's either going through the gate and he's getting bowled, or he's fishing outside off stump and he's nicking it. Those feet are not moving. He just looks out of sorts. And yeah, I think he has. I don't know how you can pick him for the next test, because he looks like a player who has just lost all confidence at the moment. And when you're like that, I think he actually, sometimes with players you go, okay, well, they can regain their form by just batting and being out there in the middle. I think he actually needs to go away and work on some of these. These are technical problems that are not going to go away unless he, fixes them, because everyone around the world knows that they're there now.
Mm. I think the challenge for New Zealand is that other than Will Young, there isn't the same echelon of cricketers that are there.
And that's why I think we've been so patient with some of these guys.
Absolutely. So the challenge for Devon Conway is, how does he fix that technical flaw? So other than, taking up all of Luke Ronke's Christmas holiday time, watching video and hitting millions and millions of balls in the nets. And look, let's face it,
I tell you what,
Luke Ronke's going to be busy this holiday period, because some of those top order really need some extra work in between now and when they next play Test cricket, which is, I think you said sometime
not till July next year.
In July.
For Devon Conway, though, before you continue, he's on a sort of a partial contract. Remember, he said, I want to step away from my contract because I want to go and play in all of these T20 leagues. So he's not going to have the opportunity to go back and play first-class cricket in New Zealand. He's going off and playing in South Africa. He's going, in the T20 leagues over there. He's going to then possibly be in the Champions Trophy team that, for New Zealand that looked locked in, a little while ago. And his form has been a real challenge. Then he goes off to the IPL. I don't know. I don't know where he's going to find the time to then actually work on some of these things. So, I mean, he took it didn't look like a gamble at the time when he stepped away from that contract. But I think now you look at it and think, well, actually, how does he work his way? If he does, they were talking on the radio a little bit about some of these guys and some of the tough decisions. And because of the age of some of the New Zealand players, that dropping them is almost, it's not as easy necessarily as, putting them back to saying, go away, work on your game and come back, maybe a year or so, because some of these guys are on the older end. Sometimes you're thinking, well, you get dropped, you might not be back. And that's what everyone was saying about Blundell. Obviously, Blundell's got 100 now. But I don't think it has to be the end for Conway. But I mean, we'll see what happens. They've been super patient with all of these guys, the New Zealand selectors, whether they make a change or not. But I think it's going to be quite tough for him to get his way, to get form again in a red ball environment, because I don't think he's going to play any until, maybe not until July next year, if he's in that Test side then.
Mm. There's certainly lots of questions that the New Zealand team are going to have to ask themselves over the next few days before they front up in Hamilton in only 3 or 4. Well, they've got a few more days off now because the Test match has finished so early. But up and down the order, I think every one of the top 7 for New Zealand at the moment has got question marks that they need to answer about their own game. Tom Latham, as you pointed out prior to going on air, has looked in reasonable nick. He's looked in reasonable touch.
He's looked okay, hasn't he? But
has found ways to go out. Devon Conway, a bit like Tom Blundell, I think Conway has more of a technical issue than Tom Blundell did. But both of them look desperate for runs, desperate for a score, and they look like they're searching for the ball. I want to come back to Blundell because he changed that mindset today. Kane is Kane. I don't think we need to worry about him too much. He got found out and he nicked off a couple of times to a reasonable bowler. Rutchin has got some work to do to just reining in the decision making a little bit. And I really liked Elliott's commentary on the TV and on when he was on the radio sport on the radio. He was asking about, if you're going to make Luke Ronchi the scapegoat of this batting performance, I think what you do have to ask yourself is, what decision-making, what plans are these New Zealand batters going out into the middle with? Because it feels like, particularly for Rachin Ravindra, playing off the back foot well outside his off stump early on in his innings against some of these England bowlers who, I'll take you to task on this, I think this is a really good England attack. It's better than you think it is. It might not be as good as Jasprit Bumrah, or it might not be as good as Cummins, Starc, Hazlewood now, but this is a really, really good England attack, and they're good because they give you no out at the moment. Gus Atkinson is at you all the time. I really like Bryden Cars. I think he's been fantastic.
Yeah, no arguments from me there.
All of the things that we said about Ollie Robinson, about, where's his effort ball, where's the continued, bustle, hustle, attitude type stuff, the extra effort type stuff. We talked about that at the end of the last test. We saw it again in this test match. I love him as a cricketer. Yeah. I think he is fantastic. But you have a look up and down this New Zealand order, even Phillips, you have to ask yourself, well, what is Phillips's plan consistently going back to an off spinner that's bowling full? Now, I know that there are trains of thought where that is an effective plan, but we saw in this test match that it was his undoing in that particular instance. And it didn't need to be, because he can use his feet and he can go down the track and he can hit the ball down the ground. Where I think we saw a point of difference in New Zealand, ironically, is in the innings of Tom Blundell, who has up until now been desperate for runs, absolutely desperate for runs. And he got onto his home track, he got onto home soil, and a little bit like Travis Head in Adelaide, has decided that I'm just going to play my way. And early on in his innings,
this is going to be my last series.
Exactly. If it's going to be my last test match, potentially it might have been his last test match for New Zealand.
I don't think it would have been his last test, but it might have been his last series.
But you could see how people have been thinking that, right? Yeah. So he's like, well, if I'm going to go out playing shots my way. And we got to see some vintage Tom Blundell in this test match. He pulled the ball hard through the leg side. He played
the shot he played where he just clipped it off his legs through, wide mid-on, wide mid-wicket. That was actually the one when I went, that's what Tom Blundell looks like. Yeah.
And he was prepared to take on the England bowlers. When they dropped a little bit short to him, he'd bang them over the leg side. And look, he decided that Shoaib Bashir had to go.
Yeah, some of those shots.
And I tell you what, in that particular instance, he came out with the best plan of the New Zealand batters in this test match, because he decided, right, he's the weak link. I'm going to target him. I'm going to bang him over the top of the field into the R.A. Vance stand end. And he just continued to do it. Stepped out, whack. Stepped out, whack. And then Shoaib Bashir bowled short and he whacked him through the leg side. Brilliant, brilliant plans. I think if anything that I would take away from this batting debacle, carousel of crap that New Zealand served up in this test match, right. if you want to be harsh, they've got to get back to playing with better plans.
They've got to have plans. I'm so annoyed. I'm so frustrated. I feel like they just have no,
because they are not all of a sudden. They're not all of a sudden players who are ill-equipped to deal with England's bowling attack.
I guess that's my point. I feel outside of Conway, who does look like someone who just has a weakness at the moment, and England know exactly where it is, and eventually they are finding it.
Yep.
The other guys look like players that, or Blundell up until today had looked, like he was struggling, but the others, doesn't seem like they should be getting dismissed in the ways that they've been getting dismissed, but they're not being able to hang around long enough to put the pressure back on England. And yeah, it's just so frustrating.
Yep. And I can see where, as a fan, that you're frustrated with that because, and I can see where you're coming from with your point of England's bowling attack isn't that good. They are that good, but New Zealand's batters are also better than they showed in this Test match. And I think that's the frustrating piece. We go now to Hamilton, a couple of days' time. A farewell test for Tim Southee for True. We know that is.
I think he's going to play, isn't he? Yes.
Are there going to be any other changes for New Zealand?
I do think that. I do think this surely will now be enough for them to say Will Young will be in for Conway. I just think, yeah. Well, for me, I definitely got to this point in this test. I've been hanging on with Conway, thinking for him, I suppose I thought he seems to still be to me that if he does get going, he's a guy who can get you a big 100 and win you a game. I just don't think he can get there now. And, you know that I have a lot of love for Will Young. I still don't love him opening in New Zealand conditions. I don't think that's the best spot for him. But I don't, I disagree with you and Raj that moving the rest of the order to accommodate a guy who's out of form, I don't think that makes sense. I think you're better off to say, okay, you guys stay in the spots that you are most equipped to do and have performed for us, and Kane and Rutchin and Daryl Mitchell. I don't think it makes sense to try and disrupt them to save Conway, because Conway, I think now Conway's flaws in his technique, England's going to find those wherever he's batting. I don't think it's because of the way he's, really struggling when the ball is moving all over the place.
You're moving Conway because you still believe that he's the same player he was when you were talking about him being the best batter in the world.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you believe he's still that same player, the reason that you would move him is to give him an opportunity to come in when the ball is not moving all over the place so that he can see ball, hit ball.
Yeah.
The problem is that if you've lost that belief, then you need to move him out of the side.
Yeah.
And then you need to have somebody else come in like Will Young who can take that spot and can make,
and I'd love
player of the series.
I would love to see Will Young take that opportunity, but
that's going to be the challenge going forward. Is that if you've lost faith in Devon Conway as an opener, you've also lost faith in him as a number 4 to a large extent. Whereas what I'm saying is, if he has an opportunity at number 4 when the ball is not moving around the place so much, and he can have a little bit more time and he can hit the ball when it's straight up and down a little bit, is that the catalyst for him? Scoring some runs. And if it's not, then that's fine. You can move him on. But it's too late for that now.
Yeah.
You've either got to stick with him going forward and go, well, we're just going to let him play till the end of his career, or you have to go, well, actually, it's time for somebody else to come into that side.
I do think that if you're looking at that side, and I don't think they're going to bring anyone from outside the squad in either. So basically, it means you've got Will Young and Mitchell Santner and Jacob Duffy to choose from. I do think that they probably, in Hamilton, if the pitch is going to turn at all, would be a better balanced side if they picked Santner instead of Southee. I mean,
But they can't do that.
But I just don't think they will. So, I think that would be better because I think, as you said before, one of the real positives out of this series, as much as he's been hit with the ball, I think Nathan Smith has shown that he's up to this level and shown that he's up for the fight. I think, when he ran out Harry Brook, look, the only way that Harry Brook looked like he was going to get out in that first innings. But when he, anticipated that ball, picked it up, threw the stumps down, the way he's been, charging in, the way he's been, batting recently, he scored 40-odd in this innings with Blundell, scored 20-odd in the first innings. He looks like he's up for the fight. And I think what we've seen from New Zealand these first 2 tests
is a lack of that.
Yeah, totally.
You haven't dragged England deep into the game as you ordinarily would, and it's good to see Nathan Smith, even though I think maybe he's not as talented a bowler right now in his career as a Kyle Jamieson is or as a Will O'Rourke is, but he's clearly exhibiting, not that Will O'Rourke didn't, I thought that Will O'Rourke bowled reasonably well.
Totally.
But he is exhibiting the kind of outward body language, positivity, chest puffed out kind of stuff that we would expect of all New Zealand players in this series, and we haven't quite seen that, particularly from the batting group, but also, collectively the bowlers have been a little bit downtrodden because England are just that good when they get on top.
They've been very good. And look, we've focused mainly on New Zealand, obviously, in this discussion. We should obviously, just before we finish, say, Jacob Bethel's come in and looked like he scoring at this level is not going to be a problem for him. Obviously only early days in his career, but yeah, he looks like someone who can certainly hit the ball and a free flowing player. And he's taken he's been given these opportunities probably through an injury. I don't think he was going to play if, they'd been talking about Cox playing those games in the lead up. It seemed like Bethell was just here as a spare batsman. That injury happens. He gets those opportunities, and now he's made it tough for them. He made it tough enough with that 50 to say, let's not bring in Ollie Robinson. Let's leave Pope because we want to see Bethell. Just like the guys said last week, actually, they said, let's see if Jacob Bethell can actually handle it. And he handled it again very, very well in this test. And I don't know, we've talked about Joe Root a lot over the years of our podcast, but I think I will just throw it to you very, very briefly to finish. Another Test 100. You said to me off air, you feel like he's now the best to watch out of that Fab Four, which I think 3 years ago, I don't know that we would have been saying that about Joe Root, but he's certainly in the best form. His form over the last few years has been fantastic, and he's kind of got everything now.
He's just terrific to watch. He has figured out his role in the McCullum-Stokes era. He's figured out the best way that allows him to make big runs. He continues to make hundreds. He continues to convert at an elite level, which is a criticism
50,
over the
60s, hundreds.
Unbelievable number of Test hundreds. Now he remains on track to go past Sachin Tendulkar. Let's hope that he plays enough Test cricket going forward for England that he can get towards that magical milestone. And I think just watching him bat and watching Smith bat in this series against India, and no disrespect to Kane Williamson, but Joe Root is now my favourite player to watch of those big four, just because he looks like he's just enjoying his cricket so much.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the conversation was between Stokes and Root when Root was on 98, but in my head, I would love to think in my head, the conversation mid-pitch was, Rooty, I bet you can't ramp one over the keeper to bring up your 100. I bet you can't. And Joe Root just goes, just hold my beer, Ben. I'll be back in a second. Because that is
bowling 140
that
plus.
is just the most audacious way to bring up a Test 100. And it just shows me that he's having the absolute time of his life in that team. And, look, you can talk about whatever you want in terms of the narrative around that England team. But when you see just a moment like that, when a guy's on 98, he's watched two of his teammates perish in the 90s that day, like within the last, I was going to say hour, but it felt like that.
Yeah.
They were going so quickly, England. But just to see him just have that audacity to bring up his 100 in that way, it just goes to show you how much joy they have in that dressing room. And, that England team...
It also shows you that they were playing with us, playing with your food.
Look, they might have been. But on that note, I want to just end the podcast with just how terrific it was to watch that moment and just the unbridled joy of Ben Stokes down the other end.
Yeah, arms up.
Root's on his knees, having flipped one over the wicketkeeper's head for 4 to bring up his 100. And Ben Stokes is just standing there, just arms aloft at the other end in absolute moment of ecstasy and joy. It was painful for you, I'm sure, but as a neutral, it was terrific to watch. I hope you've enjoyed watching this, like, just absolute smorgasbord of entertaining Test cricket that we've had over the last 14 days or so.
Going probably now as we're recording. I think there's more tests going on. Between
the England game, the New Zealand game, the Australia-India game, both of them in that Test series, both of them in this England-New Zealand series, we've been treated to some absolutely marvellous Test cricket. Thank you so much for spending almost an hour and 20 minutes with Stu and I rambling on about the outcome of both of those games. Some of them good for Australia, some of them not so good for New Zealand. But it's been fun to chat with you again, Stu, and we'll catch up with everyone again next week in This Week in Cricket. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Top Order podcast. Stay well. We wish you the very best of a festive season from here in Auckland, New Zealand. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next time on the Top Order podcast.